Welcome to those of you who are attending our webinar Veterans as Volunteers. So I welcome you to the Soul Repair Center webinar. My name is Nancy Ramsay, Director of the Soul Repair Center at Brite Divinity School on the campus of TCU in Fort Worth, Texas. The center provides resources for religious leaders and professional caregivers who support veterans and their families and active duty personnel affected by moral injury. September through May, we offer free monthly webinars with a focus on topics relevant in veterans' lives that have been inadequately covered or not yet addressed. Within 10 days to 2 weeks, links to these webinars are then posted on our website, where you will find ample additional materials related to moral injury. The Soul Repair Center is grateful for the support of the Shea Center on Moral Injury at Volunteers of America, which co-sponsors these webinars. Serving as volunteers is a deep commitment shared by many veterans, whether as individuals, in local groups, or in national organizations. This webinar will include opportunities to learn from the experiences of veterans who demonstrate an ongoing commitment to volunteer in various ways that serve their communities and other veterans. Today, we hear from persons that work in small groups, such as those who repair and build houses through Habitat, those who participate in national organizations such as Team Rubicon, responding to national disasters using the skills they developed in the military, and those who work individually with vulnerable persons. Our participants today include Jack Sanders, a Cold War 1967-69 veteran who volunteers in multiple substantial ways in his state and local community. Lyle Peterson, a Vietnam veteran, who participates in a group of veterans building homes for veterans who need them, and also personally volunteers, often with Habitat, to repair and build houses. Habitat Build is another example of veteran groups in local communities and to help build and repair homes. And from Davis Picklesimer, a staff person with Team Rubicon, and Phil Ditto, a veteran who belongs to Team Rubicon, a national organization of veterans who bring their skills to bear in response to disasters, such as the recent hurricane that devastated the west coast of Florida. Through these representative veteran volunteers, we have an opportunity to understand how service to their communities is a core commitment that reservists and veterans bring not only to their military service, but also to their local communities and beyond. Our format will include initial presentations by Davis and veteran Phil Ditto of Team Rubicon, followed by Lyle Peterson, who with other veteran colleagues volunteers through Habitat, and then by Jack Sanders, who volunteers in multiple ways in his state of Delaware and in his local community. I'm also grateful to Kyle Fauntleroy, a retired chaplain in the U.S. Navy, now a development officer at Brite and a founding member of our board, who will serve as our chat monitor, and Sam McAllister, production staff person at VOA. At around the top of the next hour, following initial presentations and some shared conversation among our presenters, we will invite your questions. Please use the chat function to share those questions, which Kyle Fauntleroy will forward to me. Thank you so much for joining us today. And remember that in about a week to 10 days, a recording of this webinar will be available along with those of all our previous webinars. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Davis Picklesimer and Phil Ditto. We're going to do a joint presentation. I'll first start with a few slides about Team Rubicon, and then I will interview Phil and his journey as a veteran. So Sam, if you could pull up the first slide. So Phil and myself are both volunteer leaders. Phil is in the Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Mississippi as far as field readiness. And then I am in Western North Carolina, part of the Asheville Metro as administrator. And Phil and I have become friends over serving in the field. Go ahead, Sam, for the next slide. Team Rubicon is a veteran-led humanitarian organization that serves global communities before, during, and after disasters. Go ahead and next slide. A few of our capacities that we do when we come in, we treat this as a military operation. We use the incident command model And so for a lot of veterans, there's some feel of home to that. And we have a battle rhythm that goes through the day. And so with that, we'll have at a disaster, we'll do site surveys. We'll have muck outs of homes where there's water damage. We do roof tarping. We have an incident command that's available. We can also help in counties that might have limited resources in that area. We also, just today, I had a meeting on some fire mitigation, which is before a disaster. And then also as far as route clearance, and then also as some rebuilds. We were in Selma after the tornadoes, and we've been in Houston as far as helping on rebuild. So it's fairly vast as far as what Team Rubicon offers, and you can find your spot where you feel like you can serve best from your training, from your gifts and talents, and so forth. That's the end of the slides that we have. You can see there teamrubiconusa.org for some follow-up information. And we'll now shift over and we'll start having a conversation with veteran Phil Ditto. Hey, Phil.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to be here and excited to provide some context and some information to all the attendees here. I appreciate you taking your time to be here today.
And we wanted this to be personal as well, not just a slideshow. And that's why the interview with Phil. And so the first question is Phil, can you walk the group through your journey as active duty and then the transition into becoming a veteran?
So yeah, I enlisted in the U.S. Army at the end of basically 2007 and was medically retired in 2014. I served as an ICU nurse and a flight medic and did a 400-day tour in Afghanistan. And my transition is very similar to a lot of veterans, unfortunately, during the war on terror, with a lot of physical and mental health concerns that have unfortunately ceased their journey a little earlier than expected. And so during that time, I found myself abruptly becoming a veteran in 2014, whether I was ready to or not.
So Phil, in your journey, you have a couple different aspects. You're not just a veteran, you also, through your time as serving, you had some incidents that was there, you had a health, and then you had a helicopter, but then also on your faith side, you had a couple different chapters that how you went into the military and how you came out were very different, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, to kind of highlight some of the different things there, as far as, yeah, I survived a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. I was a medic on a mission where the helicopter actually crashed right next to me. And as far as my faith concerns were, I came in as a pretty devout atheist, actually. Used a lot of logic, or at least what I thought was logic, to ascribe to that personal belief. But it was actually an Army chaplain by the name of Chaplain Gilbert, and in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, when I was stationed as a nurse at Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii, and found my way to belief in Jesus that way. And there was anything too incredibly special. He was giving an in-briefing, as a lot of veterans are very familiar with, the lack of personality that goes into most of those. However, over the next few weeks after that meeting, I found myself becoming a believer. And then about 2 months after that, was baptized in the waters of Hawaii in my uniform. So very great moment for me in my journey there, for sure.
Was there anything unusual about Chaplain Gilbert's approach that made him, that you felt that you could approach him and ask questions? Is there anything that comes to mind? Because there's a number of chaplains that are on this, and so there might be a little bit of insight you could offer, one from about atheist to, all right, I'm seeking more.
I think there's just an applicability, right? And Chaplain Gilbert was an infantry sergeant before he became a chaplain in the U.S. Army. And one thing I really enjoyed about Captain Gilbert was he understood the duality of being a warrior and being a believer. That you can be somewhat scruff around the neck, We're not always known for our cleanest language, things of that way, verb choices and whatnot. And but he had a really great way of defining what's at your heart and your motivations versus necessarily some of your appearance things. One text that I keep several texts of copies of this book, was Messy Spirituality, and talked about how, as imperfected as we are as people, how we can really have this great motivation to serve others. And I think that's definitely at my heart of who I am and what I believe. And so having that work and reading that and having Chaplain Gilbert to walk alongside a lot of my difficult and sometimes a little bit painful questioning, him sitting in and being prepared to take that on in our one-on-one chats every week really molded a lot of who I am today.
So then you went from active duty to a veteran. Was there any struggles in that from going from being active to veteran, identity to finding your place in the world? Is there anything you can share on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could honestly have a huge webinar about the transition that veterans face, right, from their active duty service to transitioning to being part of a civilian community again. The military is really great about breaking you down from that civilian mold and turning you into a warfighter, what the military needs you to be, right? We need these things for you to do, step you out and break you mentally and physically down and remolding you. However, what the military doesn't do typically very well is remolding you, recasting you, and breaking you back down so you're ready to enter back into civilian life, right? And so that doesn't really occur. And so a lot of the challenges I think that a lot of veterans face is the ability to relate. There's a immediate lack of fraternity and brotherhood and sisterhood, right? So as you leave, you had a purpose, you had structure and rank, you knew exactly where you were in your class systems, you knew exactly what you're supposed to do on a daily basis. And depending on what you did in the service, a lot of us would agree that probably some of the most meaningful tasks that we performed, especially, we knew what we were doing and the consequences and results of those things. And then when you transition, all that typically changes, right? Like, it may not align with school schedule. So you may get out of your time in the service, think you're going to go to college, but there might be a whole year before you can really do that. I was blessed to go to TCU and be part of the SVA. And I've spoken when I was there for the couple of years that I was there. I was blessed to be a guest speaker at the 9/11 talks and ceremonies we talk about with 22 a day and things of that nature. I've lost 3 brothers to suicide for my time in the service. And each one of them had a common thread, that there is not only just the guilt and shame of some of their service that they felt through the injury that occurred from their combat experiences, but also just the lack of there was no support there. No transition occurred. And, I think we all kind of feel that, right? So
once you became a veteran, then you were active in your church. You helped with Bible studies, as far as your family, home life, and so forth. But then back to your comment that finding, we call it inside Team Rubicon, your tribe, correct? So you explored some other volunteer opportunities that were out there. Your servant heart was still wanting to help others. So inside Team Rubicon, what areas have you felt some home? Does that make sense back from being on active duty?
So Team Rubicon provides a space very similar to that of a ministry. First of all, you're either, Team Rubicon isn't just veterans. Obviously now we have what we call kick-ass civilians. We have, first responders, we have veterans, but there's a sense of purpose. So you can utilize the skill set that you have. You have a sense of fraternity, and you have a sense to operate towards a common mission and goal. So whether we were at Hurricane Ian, we were operating to clear roads. We are operating to alleviate the suffering of the community, to clear down trees, to muck out people's houses, all at no cost to them, right? So we are lessening the impact and the devastation that was occurring to them. We wear a uniform, right? This is a gray shirt. That's what we wear on our deployments. This is a newer one, so my space bar. My name would typically be written right here. So everyone knows you. Your name can be written there. There's a very commonality between the time of service and whatnot. But we also break down some of those barriers that like some of us have kind of negative connotations to, right? So there isn't like, it's not drill sergeant, no one's knife handing you, no one's screaming at you. There's just a vast sense of belonging, glued together by everyone's innate purpose to serve a common good.
And then as far as the battle rhythm that is there, there's some structure to the day. There's some structure to the week. And so some of the old aspects of being active duty do flow over into our operations. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So you wake up 06:30, you brush your teeth, you shower, do the things that we all humans got to do. Then we eat, then we breathe, then we go get shit done. That's what we call it. And we go get it done. We come back, we eat, we shower, and then we have what we call cultural hour. We talk about what we impacted. We talk about, some of us have saved flags out there, bought new flags for other veterans that we've served, and we debrief. We talk about those things that were difficult for us to hear, the experiences of the homeowners and trauma survivors and disaster survivors. And we utilize each other as a sounding board to talk about the day and get things off our chest and have a adult beverage while we do it. And then we move on and do it the next day. And typically you do that most of us do that for about a week. An atypical presentation is when I was in Ukraine. I was a team leader serving in Ukraine, assisting those in bombed out shelters and internally displaced refugees and persons. And their battle rhythm there wasn't quite as stable as it is on a lot of ops. But again, it's reminiscent of your time in the service, right? Like you flex for the needs of what's going on in your community and what the people you're serving need.
Bill, we only have a minute left. And first, I would like just to say I'm honored to serve alongside you. I consider you a friend. I've texted you for prayer. You are a great individual, and I'm so fortunate I have a chance to serve alongside you. And one of the things I've observed is that no matter your age, whether you're 18 or 85, there's a place to serve inside Team Rubicon. Someone might say, I just physically can't do some of the saw work, I can't do tarping, but then there's this person might have a background in command. So there's a role as far as incident command or planning or logistics or helping out in a kitchen on and off. I was in Houston rebuild. There were two 80-year-old veterans, and they were having the time of their life. They could not work the full day. They would take some breaks, but we were all better for them being there. So I appreciate serving alongside you and look forward to some operations in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always a space for someone to serve. Realistically, what we're here to talk about is the desire, right? And so finding a space and having that heart is that what veterans really need, whether you're 18, 85, 90, Methuselah age, it's all fine. We're going to find a place for you. I appreciate being here, having an opportunity to speak. And thanks again, David, for the invite.
And we'll, in our closing, you are needed. That is how I want to leave it, that you are needed. And if you feel like you're ready to serve again, there is a place for you at Team Rubicon, or some of what you're going to hear in presentations afterwards. There's a place for you to still serve. So I'll turn that back over to you, Nancy.
Am I on? I'm assuming I'm on now since I'm unmuted. My name's Lyle Peterson. I served in the Army back in the 70s. One of the first things that I learned in basic training was you don't volunteer for anything. If you did, you would regret it later, probably. At the same time, over the course of enlistment, you learn that you're all in this together. If you don't volunteer to help out, somebody else got to do it, and they may come out the worse for it. So there is that part that sticks with you, I think, as a veteran. But truthfully, I hated the Army, and I got out the minute I could. And honestly, I didn't really much identify as a veteran for quite a few years after that. I was living in southeastern Nebraska, which is not a particularly militaristic area. And for one thing, military service, especially in my generation, kind of a assumed thing. You know, we had to draft back then. Everybody had to go. But it's not an area where, being a veteran was, much of an item. But 20 years ago, I moved here to the Asheville area. And it's an area where homelessness is a constant issue. And sadly, a disproportionate number of homeless people are veterans for various reasons. And still, I didn't really start to identify as a veteran very much until the Iraq invasion, and I joined Veterans for Peace and found a camaraderie that I hadn't known for a very long time. And started to get very conscious of veterans issues, particularly veterans welfare, medical issues, economic issues, and so forth. And it's well known that quite a lot of veterans are homeless because of PTSD and sometimes physical issues that prevent their long-term gainful employment. But something that's not widely acknowledged, I think, is that some of us were, not me personally, but a good many, were lured into military service with the promise of career training. And, in my case, when I got out, there was nobody who wanted somebody who had experience in shooting tanks. So I was fortunate I already had a career track. But a lot of veterans are not just unemployed, but underemployed, and have been much of their lives because they learned skills that they had no particular use in civilian life. And they had to start over from ground zero. And depending on where they started and where they started from, they might or might not been able to afford decent housing. And this is one reason that I and some others here in Asheville area have gotten involved in housing, first of all, with Habitat for Humanity. Now, they don't here in Asheville have a specific group of veterans and don't have any like quota for veterans for housing. But we know that by providing affordable housing, which is what Habitat does, because for comparable house, Habitat compared with open market, Habitat has a mortgage rate of about a third of what you would pay on the open market, which means that people with ordinary jobs can actually afford their own house so that they'll live in for 20, 30 years. And even if the house, and I work on a different house every week. I work one day a week and I work on a different house every day. I don't know how many of them go to veterans. Some of them are going to the children of veterans my age, actually. But I know that for every affordable unit that we provide, that something opens up somewhere else that someone can move into. Furthermore, there's a group here in Asheville that is called Beloved Asheville that provides a lot of services, initially to homeless people or unhoused people, especially food, clothing, emergency things, medical care, emergency medical care. They also provide food distribution for a larger group, and they've recently started what they call Beloved Village, which will be a dozen tiny houses that will be deeply affordable. And we're pretty certain that because of the clientele that they serve, we're pretty certain that at least one of those is going to benefit a veteran as well. So my chapter of Veterans for Peace is doing work days there at Beloved Village. And, we have a certain camaraderie and work well together, partly because we are veterans. And we know that if we don't do it and nobody else does, somebody's going to suffer for it. I'm not quite certain what else I can say. I think that our experience as veterans taught us a certain interdependence, and that's one reason that we volunteer. And as I said to Nancy at one time earlier, I think there's a certain, for some of us, a sort of atonement because of what we did back then. And we're trying to make up for it by doing something good now. So I don't know. I hope I'm not disappointing, but I don't really know what more I can say except in response to something. So there you are.
That's great. And we'll come back to you and we're all gathered together. Thank you very much. Let's move to, there you go, Jack. You have to unmute.
Asio Ganali Duhiju Nokwo Eteku Wado. In English, I just said, greeting friends, how are you? I am fine, and thank you. I'm a military veteran in a history in my family of military veterans, all who have done service to our country, which makes me a very proud Native American. Some of the things that I have done in my desire to disprove the contention that the road to hell is paved with good intentions are things such as when I was younger, I was teaching Sunday school with various grades from senior high down to 3, 4s, and 5s. I was also volunteering as a coach. I did sports with the children in the area, both baseball and soccer. When I got older, I was volunteering, for instance, working with the Native American communities to help indigenous peoples. I've co-signed for loans for my Native American brothers, families. That has been proven expensive since they have a tendency to default and go back to the reservation. But again, I'm trying to help them out. My responsibilities as I got older included volunteering for such things as I'm on the Governor's Council for Interfaith-Based Partnerships, and I coordinate various faith communities and bring them together to experience one another, because I believe that we have so much in common. I work extensively with the Jewish community. I've spoken at Shabbats. I speak at children's gathering groups on being raised Native American Cherokee. I also was able to coordinate programs to collect food and clothing for a Akwesasne Mohawk community up in Medina, New York, when they were having a standoff with the government about an incident on the reservation. And I had a whole group of youth. The program is the Indian Guides. We collected a truckload of non-perishables, clothing and blankets, and we trucked them up to Medina. A trucking line volunteered to assist with that. I also have been involved with feeding the homeless, and some of them are veterans, and that gives me great satisfaction to help these people. We feed them out on the street 12 months out of the year, and some of them sadly take their food packages. We also give them some clothing. They will actually then go back under the bridge into their cardboard boxes where they're living. And it's very disconcerting, but we do what we can. Another thing that I've done for 10 years is I have been an instructor. I developed a program to go into the men's prison. I went in as a volunteer doing ESL. I hablo español. I speak Spanish and I speak German. I speak some Cherokee and some English. And so for 10 years, I was teaching in a men's prison. And my first 2 years, because of my extensive background with youth, they asked me if I would work with a special group called YCOP. Now, YCOP in the men's prison stands for Young Criminal Offender Program. Now, the reason that the 16 teenagers, 16, 17, a couple are 18, were in there was because of their offenses. Most of my students were in for murder. And that was something that was so serious that they would not have them participate with the Ferris Detention Center, where I also have given talks with the teenagers in the lesser situations of offense-wise. So I also work with these men, not only teaching them the 7 Habits program and bringing in powerful guest speakers, congressmen, federal appellate court judges. My son's well, despite the fact he goes to work on a motorcycle, has rings in both ears and a ponytail halfway down his back, everybody at his office greets him with "Good morning, Your Honor," because he happens to be a Superior Court judge over in New Jersey. So, you know, it takes all kinds to fit into the life we live. But I bring in these guest speakers. All my students are guaranteed interviews, almost 200, with felon-friendly companies, because I worked extensively with the employers community to help get these men job opportunities. And I brought in county and state executives who have all offered to hear from the men. If they graduate from my program, they get letters of commendation from friends of mine, Chris Coons, Senator Coons, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, Matt Meyer, county executive, and a state senator, Stephanie Hansen. And one of the men came up to me at one point and he said, "Mr. Sanders, I want to tell you something." He said, "Your program saved my marriage." I also have a stack of very, very heartwarming letters from how the program has turned the lives around of these men, some of whom are veterans, by learning. And I arranged for a pen pal program where they get communications from professional people that are accomplished. They would never meet on the street in the hood. And I believe that it is so important for us to serve our brothers whenever we can. And when I first went into the prison, the brothers came up to me and said, "You know, what's your angle? What's your gig? What are you going to be doing here?" And I said, "I'm here for 2 reasons." I said, "Number 1, you're my brother. And number 2, I love you." Well, the first cycle was okay. But then when the street came back with the stories about my getting them jobs, I was the goose that laid the golden eggs in the men's prison. And I keep in touch with my graduates when they get out. Some have been very successful. I also have been involved with indigenous peoples in Delaware. I'm on the Governor's Council on Interfaith Partnerships. And what I do is I represent the Wilmington Diocese Catholics. I'm a mackerel snapper. and also the indigenous peoples. And I am familiar with the tribal leaders in Delaware and will work with them to help them. I also I'm a housing commissioner for the Delaware Hispanic Commission. And there I work with the Latino community. I use my ability to speak Spanish. I assist these individuals with all kinds of legal issues, housing issues, law issues, simply because as a veteran, I realize I've seen the pain and suffering that's been occasioned, for the most part, in East Germany. I was there in the late 60s, and I dealt with Comrade at times, and the Russians were pretty nasty folks, as you probably are well aware of from our Ukrainian situation. I also was subjected at an earlier age. I spent 2 years in a foreign country called Alabama, and that was in the mid 60s. And that got my desire to support the non-Anglo communities, because I ended up at Selma on the march from Selma to Montgomery by Martin Luther King, inadvertently, because I was playing ball in college and we just played Tulane. So I was coming up to go to Montgomery, and we got in front of the marchers in Selma. And I've seen some pretty ugly, nasty stuff. So I find that my military background is something that requires me to be able to use what I've learned in helping people, in leading people, and giving encouragement to people so that they can persevere. Because as we also know, there's a tremendous number of suicides from military veterans, and we cannot do enough to try to help these people. I would say in closing that my family has been in the military since 1812, when I had family members fighting with Andrew Jackson against the Creeks and the British in New Orleans. And then I had family members who fought in the Civil War under Stan Waddy. Some fought in the North, some in the South, but they were military veterans. Then I had family members who fought. My dad served in World War II. He was a career Navy Chief Petty Officer, Chief Bosun's mate. And then he served in Korea as well as World War II. And so I'm very proud of the fact that I have a military background. As a matter of fact, if you can see on my chest here, I put on a medal. I was a recipient of the Cherokee Nation Veterans Medal of Patriotism. So I was the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation awarded me this for my military service behind the Iron Curtain for those 2 years back in the late 60s. So I think that I have tried to live by something that Mark Twain said, who was once sarcastic SOB, and he said, "Let us endeavor to live such a life that when we die, even the undertaker will mourn our passing." So I'd like to conclude with that comment, and I thank you for the opportunity to be speaking with you. And I pray and hope that some people out there will get the idea that they can do something and reach out, because there's so many opportunities that go unattended. So thank you very much for the time. I enjoyed sharing it with you. I hope I didn't talk too long. God bless you and have a peaceful day. Wado.
I appreciate so much what each of you shared, and Phil, you're welcome to unmute, and Davis, if you want to. My suggestion is we use about 15 minutes or so now for you all to talk with each other. There were certainly common themes that you raised about the ways in which your experience in the military contributed to a deep sense of wanting to give back, or wanting, and for many of you, including particularly reaching out to other veterans whom you might imagine, or you imagine might feel estranged or on the margins anyway, after service. But there's clearly a pattern of not only wanting to be of use to other veterans, as Lyle was describing, in terms of providing homes for veterans that didn't have them, but also for other folks that needed support. So I wonder, first of all, if you have questions or comments for each other as you listen to each other.
Nancy, I might take a stab at that real quick.
Great.
I think one thing that was interesting, and Lyle kind of highlighted to it, and I think this is the same for a lot of veterans, right, is you don't necessarily need to enjoy or maybe have pride in the institutions of government or veteran service, right? So you may come from an era where maybe that service wasn't voluntary, right? Like you might have been drafted or different things like that. But what I have seen in my experience is that most people have, or most veterans identify with the experiences of other veterans, right? So one of those things about why transitioning is really difficult is when you come into the service, you get broken down to become part of a unit, to have these things that the military really designs you to become a warfighter. And because of those experiences, like I'm sure that, generationally speaking, we have, different generations of veterans on this call. But I guarantee you that Jack and Lyle and I probably have at least a shared cultural identity between the experiences of boot camp, training, what it's like to be potentially deployed, warfare, things of that nature, and the stresses that come alongside with those volunteering, or in Lyle's case, like not being able to volunteer and being drafted. And so one thing that's difficult in this space, and that's nice for us, is when you volunteer, a lot of us find continued fellowship and fraternity with fellow veterans that understand some of the unique cultural aspects, right? Because being a veteran is a cultural experience. So we come with our own shared practices, we come with our own beliefs, we have symbols and objects that are similar, that hold value. And so I think one of the big reasons a lot of veterans' potentiality of suicide comes from a sense of isolation and being alone. And so some of the benefits that these multiple groups and efforts that Jag and Lyle, myself, and Davis are involved in help to mitigate that loneliness and sense of purpose, right? You're around people that understand you. And that helps, as Team Rubicon especially, it helps to integrate yourself back into a society and culture of people that aren't necessarily even veterans too, right? So we serve along with civilians. Like Davis and I are a perfect example of that.
Thank you. I was going to offer a thought that I have followed for years because of my military experience. I realize that not everyone goes into the military on the dead run in that direction. And I, however, I served one cycle and then I moved on. However, I think we as veterans have an opportunity to encourage the youth today to seriously explore a possible stint in the military, because so many youth today, when they're coming out of high school, they are uncertain as to what their future is, and they're not completely well developed. I give talks at high schools, and I tell these kids that, if you don't know what you're going to do, a very good way to get a wonderful education is to go into the military and take advantage of all of the benefits that are provided by the military. And then when you come out, you will have had some training, you will have some experience, you'll be more mature, you will be a more attractive potential employee. And I think that we as veterans have a wonderful opportunity to do that, and also to encourage those of us who may be not as, shall we say, positive and maybe potentially for a suicide type scenario, to see that they have those ways in which they can contribute, because as I think we all know, when we are helping other people, we are more benefited sometimes than they are. Thank you.
One of the folks in the chat asked about how we help people understand that people on every side of a conflict are all veterans passing on PTSD or moral injury and deserving of services. How do we help folks not choose which side they wanted to support and recognize this is someone who's experiencing some of the injuries of conflict?
I think one important distinction is like culturally and in mass media, there's kind of a broad paintbrush of post-traumatic stress, and that how that differently is like individually that is expressed very differently, right? Like people's reaction to trauma is going to be different, no matter how universal that trauma might be. And so that's really important to think about. One interesting factor, side story, I thought, when I was in Ukraine, I remember hearing about this Russian paratrooper plane that had been shot down, two of them actually. And I found myself, like, initially I was like, well, good for the Ukrainians, right? Like that was the initial thought. However, very quickly, within a second, I was thinking to myself, I found myself really empathizing with what that felt like, right? Like having been in a helicopter crash myself and thinking to myself, in the end, that humanity, right? Like we are all humans suffering at the violence of what's happening. And many of those paratroopers being sent to war in Ukraine are not the ones with the ulterior motives and motivations that happen, right? So death, destruction, and warfare create a moral injury and a spiritual injury on both sides of that coin. You look at this, it's pretty prevalent and through all of America's past conflicts as well. You hear about some really, the Louis Zamperini story about restitution and restoration when he returned to Japan after being a prisoner of war. Things that have happened in Korea, Vietnam. Vietnam had a lot of restitution and restorative stories of veterans that have gone back to Vietnam to discuss and talk with others. Realistically, what it comes down to is I think most soldiers would agree and understand, especially those that have been in combat, that it's about the person to your right and left, but also human beings are gonna empathize with the fact that we're all just trying to survive a political ramifications of violence that are being enacted. You can see this as early as the First War, the Great War, in the really interesting story about how German and English troops on Christmas Day played soccer, right? At the end of the day, I think there's a humanity that's expressed by most of us with the understanding that as agents of the government at some points or another, we understand that violence and pain is happening on both sides.
If I can offer a thought, one of the things that I've done with my former offender students when they get out is I make sure if they're a part of any faith community to take them to that community to reintegrate, because I believe that there is such a critical value in a spiritual foundation to any journey you are attempting to take. And this equally applies to veterans. I think that when we come across a veteran that whether they're struggling or not, I think it's important that we ask if they have any prior spiritual background, and then see if there's some way that we could introduce them to a community that we feel they would be a really good fit in. Because I believe from my experience that most of the time, if you want to help someone stay out of prison or avoid suicide, being among a group of people who can care about you and not their own self-interests can be a very strong support mechanism for those individuals who, whether it be military and depressed, and of course, a lot of my former students, when they get out, it's a very depressing situation too. And that's why I try to get them back into their own faith communities.
Could I say something?
Yeah, Lyle, we're missing your photo, but we're glad to hear your voice.
Okay, I don't know what I can do about that, but oh, wait a minute.
There you
There
go.
I am. Okay. None of us have really mass media capabilities in terms of helping people understand stuff, but we all have our circles, various social circles. And one way to get at least a few people to understand situation, empathize with people who are in uh, tough situations, is to invite them at least temporarily into our circle and let people meet them face to face, nose to smell in some cases. But that's to humanize people that way is a very important step in getting them help.
I remember, Lyle, that you have a group of veterans with whom you meet in the Asheville area, and you all work together, but you also meet simply to, I take it, to enjoy each other's company, and as you're suggesting, perhaps draw support from each other in the journey that life is. And I think that's what you're getting at. From what I could hear Phil saying, and I know what Davis described for me after the workday, is that there's a strong sense of community that goes along with building a house, and knowing that, well, maybe one of your veterans, a fellow veteran, is going to then have a place to live where they're safe, and instead of under a bridge, as too many have here in the Asheville area. So I wonder if you could, if you three could talk about, but since Lyle and Phil mentioned this, what facilitates that kind of community that you have, Phil, after the workday with Team Rubicon, or after you've built I know, Lyle, you sometimes meet in the evening with your team, but also, maybe alongside putting a house together at Beloved or other places in Nashville. That was a long question, sorry.
Well, one of our past national presidents of Veterans for Peace came and speak to us years ago, and he said he's seen a number of organizations, including peace organizations, come and go, and the ones that stick around are the ones that have potlucks. So it's one of the things we do, and to it's like a debriefing, like we've been talking about with the project with the emergencies. Debriefing afterwards really solidifies your feelings and makes you want to do it again.
That's a good point. And I'm also a member of the Interfaith Veterans Work Group that Mr. Tom Davis, who's the president, founded. It's a group of all former veterans, and we get together maybe once or twice a month, and we share with one another what's going on in our lives and how we might be able to help each other and help the community. And again, I know from personal experience that when you are actively helping other people, it can provide a sense of satisfaction that is unmatched. So I think that looking to join veteran groups is a wonderful way to meet other veterans and support them in whatever ways possible.
Okay.
Nancy,
You want to talk? Oh yeah, I saw. Go ahead, Davis.
no, I put it in chat that one thing that connects all of us is our servant heart, but also our pain. And we've all been through trauma. We've all had to experience things. And so, like when I walk into an event that's Team Rubicon, I might not know everyone there personally, but I know they've been through something. So there's safety in that. There's community in that. And so on the faith side, there's also opportunity to encourage each other, to be there, to sit with each other, to Jack's point. But I have to caution, not all faith-based organizations can handle the pain of first responders and veterans. Many times that's just too much. And so it does take the right chaplain. It takes the right person. In my personal journey, it takes a person that's dealt with their own pain before they can sit with someone else in their pain. And so some of this is an internal and one-on-one with walk with God. Then all right, now I can sit with someone else through their journey and their walk with God.
I think part of what each of you has described, that a facet of this is what I think you're getting at, Davis, was the common experience of military service creates a bond that that helps reconnecting happen around it. That there's some things that don't even have to be articulated, it appears, from that shared experience, though articulating it sometimes, I think, sounds like it's important as well.
I think the military in general is used to shorthand, right? We have an acronym for just about everything we do. But I think one thing is important to conceptualize that the military just that experience is going to be very different for a lot of different people, right? Like, so there's going to be, and my favorite expression is individual experiences may vary, right? Like we all kind of, but at the end of the day, I think most people, it doesn't matter what the work you're doing, necessarily what the individual work is, that really at the end of the day, you're conceptualizing an idea of being driven and motivated to move and be in action, to be biased toward action, to do something for someone else. So that's the connecting thing, I mean, amongst veterans and other volunteer organizations, right? And I think what that means is, I think to Davis's point is, the military community or veterans in general, we might bring some pretty heavy things and experiences with lack of a filter sometimes that can catch a lot of people off guard. But I would say that trauma in the way that it impacts people is very similar, right? Like I have 2 adopted children, and they're adopted from the Texas foster care system, and they've experienced their own set of traumas. And what's interesting to me is that all 3 of me and my 2 girls, we all understand and we can see things in each other about our individual reactions to trauma and post-traumatic stress and things of that nature that aren't siloed in a military community. But what we have, like in this, like in Chief Rubicon, and Davis kind of hit it on the head, is we have a bias towards a common goal, right? To serve and to continue serving others for the betterment of people. And I think that strikes a chord with probably everyone on this call. So if you're thinking about how you're going to build that relationship, you don't have to build, like, in fact, I would think it'd be detrimental to try to figure out how you can be veteran specific, or how can I like include a veteran, like thinking of us like in a separate space, but rather just acknowledging that trauma is trauma. Everyone's going to have an individual experience in relationship with that, but we're going to have very shared experiences. And so the best ways to potentially have ministry or service around that is inclusivity and also a shared intended purpose for service, right? There's a very restorative action in helping other people when you've been injured yourself.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to respond to what Phil was just saying? It sounds as if if I've heard you correctly, Phil, that part of working out the trauma of participating in war, as you did, is of giving back in a way that is life-giving or life-renewing, and alongside others whom you are confident understand that particular experience of being a combat veteran. Am I right about that? Did I hear that right?
I think so. I think one distinction I might say is that you don't have to be the principal actor in some of the damaging things that happen, right? So for instance, my role in Afghanistan, I was a flight medic, right? But there was an actor that was instituting violence and someone was injured, and thus my necessity there, right? And so I think what we all come to is that this restoration occurs because, yes, there's some trauma that has occurred in either our collective life or our individual experience. And I think all of us are really driven towards an idea of how we can make this experience, or maybe this world, honestly, a better place.
I would offer, one of my most gratifying experiences was for quite a while. I was selected to be a veteran who would work with other veterans who had been incarcerated and now were trying to stay on the straight and narrow. And I would meet them in some pretty unfortunate places. And it was very important for me to instill in them a sense that they could succeed and they could avoid the drugs, they could avoid the alcohol, they could avoid the addictions and the behavior that had gotten them incarcerated. And I thought the Delaware judicial system was very wise to select veterans like myself to work with these people as sort of like clients. And it was very gratifying to see them seeing the support that they could get and the encouragement. And they've said, a couple said that it was very helpful to them in kind of avoiding a relapse. And I think that I hope hopefully other judicial systems will try to find opportunities to help their former offender veterans be able to get veteran encouragement and assistance.
Yeah. One of the things that it strikes me is important here is the ways in which when veterans are together, there are some things that you don't even have to talk about so much because you've been there. But it does seem to me there's just so many stories that I've learned from other veterans or from veterans about the value, the importance, the kind of motivation for doing projects, whether that's building a house like Lyle was describing, or working on a playground for kids, or teaching kids how to read, or working with veterans that have gotten in trouble with the law. But in other words, there's something about giving. I don't know whether that was a part of a decision for some people, just entering the military, or whether that's a value that is strengthened there. But part of what I hear here is that there's a commitment to volunteer in ways that bring value to the community beyond your immediate friends or colleagues. Am I right about observing that? It's not, I don't mean that that's the total answer. I'm just saying that seems to be a common thread.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent observation. And I do think that fortunately I was raised Cherokee. I'm familiar with our culture, some of our language and our belief systems. And interestingly, people wouldn't know this normally, but Native Americans had a strong sense of community. You might say tribal community, but that was something that was instilled in all of us. And consequently, I feel that it served my father in his military career. He also did a lot for other people, but he was a little bitter because he went to in Oklahoma, the Chilocco Indian boarding school. So he was a graduate of an Indian boarding school, which is not your greatest cup of tea. But he was so impressive to me as a career Naval American Chief Petty Officer, how much he did things for other people, and it just strengthened in my brothers the importance of really doing things and not being apathetic. And I think that the biggest risk we all face in life is the risk of apathy. Are we too comfortable sitting back to not be constantly exploring ways in which we can better serve our brothers and sisters?
Yeah. Lyle, I'm inviting you back into the conversation, if you can, to say some more about the ways in which the group with whom you meet, and sometimes build houses, but you're meeting together. How do you think that function of working alongside each other and also meeting as veterans, how does that help sustain not only you personally and each of them personally, but a sense of community that is valuable?
Well, yes, a sense of community, I think, is something important in the human condition. It's also vital in accomplishing anything. some of us go off on individual tangents and get a little bit done when we can agree on something and have a common priority. We can get some big things done. Now there's a risk to it because when you are together, there's a risk of conflict, and we have had that from time to time. But those that make it through the conflict have a stronger community.
Well, you do, but it also sounds to me like, for example, the group where you are, and I remember Davis describing the ways in which after work, when Team Rubicon is deployed someplace, that there's a strong sense of community when you all are back after, when it's dark and you can't do any more work with rescuing or rebuilding. There's something about that camaraderie which clearly is life-giving and life-sustaining. It sounds, at least as I hear it.
It's important, I think, when you're dealing with veterans. I had the privilege several years ago to participate in a march. I didn't do the entire march. It was a group of veterans. We marched, some of us marched starting in Washington, D.C., up over 5 days to the Wilmington Administration Building, where we were greeted by General Vavala. And we were doing this to commemorate our fallen brothers and sisters from prior conflicts. And there was such a bond. I was one of the few non-Marines, so they were willing to tolerate me. But we did grow a lot closer together. We learned a lot about each other, and we've gotten together since then. And it's always been a very uplifting experience, because that's another shared experience that we have in common as veterans.
So what's it like for you? Go ahead, after a day's work.
Yeah, I think there's something just awesome about like going, like we just have this kind of the GSD motto, but there's just something really awesome about going out. So I do Sawyer work when I'm not doing command and general staff. So for instance, I'll go out with 4 Sawyers. For those that aren't familiar, that's basically someone that cuts up trees, right? Like we go out there with chainsaws.
Uh-huh.
And so Ian, like we went out and we were cutting a lot of trees because there was just a tremendous amount of damage that had happened in the Fort Lauderdale area, Fort Myers area. And so you spend about 10 hours a day working and cutting, moving trees, moving this, going and drinking and hydrating and doing it more. And so when you get, I know it's going to be a good day on our, what we call our FOB, or forward operating base. I know it's going to be a good day on our FOB when gray shirts are coming back drenched. Their gray shirt is now more of a heather gray. It is dark. People are sweaty. They're dirty. We have sawdust, what we call, all up in our faces and in our beards and whatever. But those are the best nights. They tend to always be the best nights. The harder volunteers in our organization work, the more the camaraderie, they're laughing, they're joking, they're sharing stories. And it's not about the work. It's almost never culturally about the work. They don't talk about like, oh man, we worked so hard today. They may make some jokes, but it's always the stories about the interactions with their team or the homeowners they are working with. How the homeowners were disaster survivors, the interactions they were having about how they felt about helping this person out. The stories, I had a disaster survivor that we talked about their service, and they happen to be veterans too. And we talked about their experience in the Vietnam War. And I had one really just like very impactful moment where one of them just started crying. And it was very emotional for me. And I started kind of crying, and I wasn't even really sure why I was crying. And they were just like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And at first I thought they were just thanking us for coming out to do some damage control, the disaster mitigation. But realistically, at the end of the day, they were thanking me, and that's what they told me, because they never got to thank their Vietnam medic that saved their life. And I was acting as a proxy for that medic, because I served as a medic in Afghanistan. And it was a shared community of medicine / veteran identity that they were able to have some sort of restoration from their experience in Vietnam. just through our interactions on this operation, because I also was a military veteran, which made me started becoming emotional because of my interactions as a medic with the soldiers that I served in Afghanistan, right? So there's this liminality, right, like between generational war fighters that happens. And so he was just so moved that he felt like he had to thank me as a proxy for the medic that saved his life. So we have these just debriefings, but they're not debriefings. We just call them campfires. We have a campfire. We serve 2 beers to the volunteers that are there. We have cultural principles such as like be adults only, right? So we have policies on substance abuse and things of that nature to protect the volunteers and things of that things as well, like any organization does. But in my experience, as large as TR is, and in the austere and kind of really chaotic environments that we operate in, the camaraderie is what holds people together. I have never witnessed a physical altercation. I've heard people yelling and stuff. Humans are going to have conflict, but realistically, I've seen just a tremendous amount of acceptance among multiple political and ideological lines that I don't think you really experience in the United States in particular these days. But yeah, I think it's a shared understanding between community and service, capitalizing and capstoning towards a common goal of restoration for someone else.
That's a good point. I was going to say that I had the privilege, I call it a privilege, back in the mid-70s. I took in 2 Vietnamese soldiers who had left Vietnam with the expectation they were going to be going back in, regrouping from Saigon. And of course, it was a one-way trip. And I had other veterans who initially questioned my willingness to help these Vietnamese soldiers. However, when they saw that I was able to help these people, we got other people to help them with things. And when other veterans have the opportunity to help their veterans from another country, that made them feel especially good about what they were doing. So I just think that's so critical that we always are on the lookout for how we might best serve people in general and our veterans in particular.
I need to beg off and leave you all here. My local chapter of Veterans for Peace holds a vigil every Tuesday evening in downtown Asheville, and I need to leave about now to join them. So it's been a good experience. I hope I've been able to add a little something.
Thanks so much, Lyle. And I hope that
Thank you,
vigil
Lyle.
is helpful to you. Appreciate it. Take care. We have about 10 minutes left here, and I'm wondering if there are particular thoughts you want this broader audience to hear, located in various parts of the country. And possibly people will view this later from Britain or even Australia, other parts of the world, that you would hope they could hear for responding or offering possibilities for veterans. Let's say whether it's in a town or in a congregation of any particular faith group that might be of use from what you know in your own experience, especially about volunteering, being of use, so to speak.
I think it's always a good idea for veterans to reach out to any local military establishment to find out what's going on for veterans in general, but also to see if there's opportunities for them to involve themselves in the service of others. And I think that if they don't know where to go, it's very easy to identify local or locations for the military. We have them here in Delaware, quite a few of them, and I have gone to them, and they have been tremendously helpful to some of the things that I do or try to do. And I think that that's a wonderful way for anyone who wants to be involved with a veteran to go to some of these installations and just explain what your purpose is. And I feel you will find out there's things you can do and benefit from that involvement.
I think if you, for those that are looking to assist like veterans in particular to assist their transition from the service and whatnot, or to make an impact in spaces that are inherently negative, the unhoused, substance abuse, incarceration, imprisonment ministries, and things of that nature, as Jack has alluded to. I think what you need to do is think about how you're involved in those spaces in particular, and then be deliberate about how you're maybe looking for veterans as well, right? Like, and how you're identifying those specific cultural silos that are in those areas, right? And so by doing that, if you're looking for places in which veterans are being particularly harmed, or in a space where they're not transitioning well, those are places where they're going to show, right? But if we're trying to be deliberate about how we can hopefully prevent those kind of situations from occurring, I think the first and foremost is being in partnering. A lot of times in the NGO space, partnering is everything. If Team Rubicon tries to solve the veteran crisis situation on its own, we're going to fail, and we're going to fail miserably. And so we partner with DAV, we partner with a Wounded Warrior Project, we partner with other veteran spaces, and large and small alike. And so that's how we build a network, a net, if you will, to capture at-risk veterans hopefully before they start to show in spaces like Jack has mentioned and myself have mentioned, right? And so to build those things, we have the networks and we have places for veterans to be included, internationally in particular as well. We are not the first to invent this wheel, and we certainly won't be the one keeping it rotating after we're gone. But these spaces are also, I've had a lot of luck in operating internationally. When I was deployed, I worked with NATO, Italians, Germans, Canadians, Australians. They make some really good steak. And so they're doing the similar things in their own countries, right? Like, again, this leads right back to what I was saying, that trauma as an experience is.
Oh,
Rose, Phil.
yeah.
Oh no.
Trauma is an experience, and then what?
Trauma is not an individual experience. Like we have that experience. Well, trauma is not an individual reception, right? Like, we don't just get trauma as American soldiers or service members. We don't just have trauma because we're American warfighters. Australians, Canadians, Russians, Afghanis, you name it. Everyone on each side of this line has experienced the trauma of warfighting and being a veteran, particularly since that's what we're talking about in this space. So internationally, it's, again, engaging in where veterans are present, looking at what is going on in those communities, and then deliberately coming up with a plan of action and executing that plan. So engage.
You froze again, pal. In my experience of leading these webinars, in addition to the very active engagement that you all are describing, the experience that Phil, you and Davis have described of after a hard day's work, you're sitting with folks who you don't have to explain all of the experience that you bring, because you have this in common. And I'm thinking about the ways in which there are faith communities of every type that include veterans in them. Some have found helpful just having a group to be able to talk together, and to have groups that, they might, there could be, Vietnam veterans there, and Desert Storm, and Afghanistan, and a wide range generationally, but being able to, there's something in common just to be able to share, because there is, coming home can be hard, or just finding a community. But then it seems to me what I often notice is that there's some project whether it's fixing a playground or learning how to tutor children to read, that there's a balance between regularly, as I've experienced it with veterans, of community and then giving back, giving forward. And each of you has described that in a powerful way. And I hope as we bring this to a close, that the community that has been listening in on this and those that will listen in the future are being open to looking around in whatever communities we're in. Are there veterans here? Are there ways to help folks be together? And you've provided quite a powerful illustration of that, and I'm very grateful that for your willingness to be part of this webinar and to share your own experience, and then to really and testify in a way to the life-giving opportunity of volunteering that you share with other veterans. So I thank you for that, and appreciate the ways you continue to serve. Next time I hear about Team Rubicon, I'm going to be wondering if you guys are part of that. Thank you so much.